right, welcome back. This is lesson 3. Well, it's lesson 2, but it's the third video. And we're going to look at some of the notes that are in the Google document. So the notes are a continuation of chapter 1 and 2. It's meant to summarize some of the key points for you. Being that the notes, see, there's the end of lunch for you. Being that the notes are already online, I don't think you need to write everything down. Maybe just write down stuff that doesn't make sense that you think you want to revisit. So if your goal here is to write everything down, well, it's already on that Google document for you that you can access anywhere you have access to Google. So you shouldn't need to write down everything, but you can take down a summary of some of the stuff that either is the key points or the stuff that you don't understand. So one of the related terms here is pop culture. And we're going to begin by linking pop culture to globalization. So what we're looking at is the impacts of communication technology and media on diversity. So diversity is differences. And earlier today we talked about how one of the consequences or externalities of globalization is that we may end up sacrificing some of those differences. And sacrificing differences can be a negative thing, as when we sacrifice differences, we may lose those agents of change that end up propelling us to the next stage of humanity. That if we all simply agree and we have homogenization, it can create unity of purpose, and that can be fantastic, but it can also be stagnating. There's not a lot of room for revolution if everyone's united and agreeing. So it's often those agents of change come from some kind of diversity. So our first connection here is looking at pop culture and diversity. So what is pop culture? Popular culture or pop culture is what people choose to buy, say, read, listen to, watch, and wear, all affect pop culture. So pop culture obviously has changed. When the term pop culture first originated in the 20th century, one of the main agents of pop culture would have been newspaper. I can't remember the last time I read a newspaper. Newspaper gets delivered to our house, and it's unfortunate because we don't need it, we don't want it. So often it just gets recycled. Newspaper is not the primary way that I engage the world. It's not the way I see the world in 2020. So pop culture itself is an evolving term. That there's vehicles that deliver pop culture that are relatively new. So at one point, newspapers were a new vehicle of pop culture, but now when we talk about new vehicles of pop culture, we would be talking about fill in the blank. You're younger than I am. You know the new vehicles better than I do. So what's a new vehicle of pop culture? How do you read, listen, watch? How do you engage the world socially, culturally through something new? Give me an example. Yes? Memes. So memes are relatively new. I remember about 15 years ago, one of the teachers here, Mr. Baylor, who's over at off campus now, yes, I should be using names. I mean, Mr. B, who's over at off campus now. We're looking at political cartoons because, as we did this morning, we dissected cartoons, and he said back then, because he's a very progressive person, maybe we should be analyzing memes. And I'm like, what? What are you talking about? Cartoons are so rich. There's so many nuances to them. And he said, but nobody's drawing cartoons anymore. Like, nobody is drawing cartoons at an individual level to try to inspire change. If you want to see the inspiration of change, there are thousands and millions of memes being released by people that are trying to create change. And I kind of looked at him like, what are you talking about? Because he was ahead of me. He understood the power of memes before I did. Memes are a way today that we try to learn about the world. That's how we read or watch or say things about the world as it is or as it should be. Any other things that maybe added to pop culture in the last 10 years? So in the United States, President Trump wants to ban TikTok because he believes that TikTok may be connected to the Chinese government. TikTok can be used to promote different cultural inversions, right? That people can express themselves through TikTok, so that might be another example. To what extent are your personal choices impacted by pop culture? Have you ever looked around and looked at people and wondered, why are they doing that? Why are they behaving like that? And then if you trace the quid pro quo of it, if you trace the logical progression, you can see that they've been inspired to do it through pop culture. What's an activity, a social behavior that you've seen repeated by many that can be traced to pop culture? Yes?
A few years ago, all the kids were into dabbing.
Okay, so dabbing, yeah, definitely. And thankfully we dab less than we used to.
A couple of years, like this is old, but fidget spinners.
Fidget spinners.
Slime.
Yep, absolutely. So how did these ideas infiltrate our culture? Through pop culture, right? We are inspired to change. Sometimes the inspiration can be good. Maybe it's you're going to dump water on your head for an awareness campaign. That's cool too. So it doesn't always have to be something like a fidget spinner that in hindsight may be fairly trivial. Hopefully I didn't attack you on an individual level if you really identify with your fidget spinners, because I know that for some people it can be very relaxing. But definitely pop culture in your lifetime has had an impact on your identity. One of the things we can look at is the universalization of pop culture. This idea that there's some pop culture that is truly global in its reach. And I think that that second one on the list is a media conglomerate that you're quite familiar with. You know, Disney and its ownership of ABC, Pixel, ESPN, Walt Disney, of course. You can add Fox to the list of what they own. They have, you know, within their franchise, they own Star Wars and all those Lucas films. That Disney has an ability to reach a market of billions of people. That's the power of pop culture. So what's some advantages of transnational media companies? So we can't argue with the fact that there are global conglomerates. Now we have to ask ourselves, is this a good thing or a bad thing that we have global conglomerates? We have global conglomerates. We can trace it to who owns what, like Time Warner and Disney and Comcast and Viacom. But is it a good thing or a bad thing? So some people look at media conglomeration and concentration of ownership of media, and they see it as a threat. They see it as a threat to democracy. So in a healthy democracy, the media is meant to be a watchdog that says, oh, something's wrong. Justin Trudeau has misallocated hundreds of billions of dollars, and he's lied about where he spent it, that he needs to be held accountable. So in a healthy democracy, the media is a watchdog that sounds the alarm when government is violating their relationship with us. Why might it become a concern if the media is owned by only a few people? Why would it become concerning if 90% of the media is in the hands of 5 or 6 companies? Why would that become concerning? Yes? They could be biased, right? So if you have 5 or 6 companies that control 90% of the global media, then what's the agenda of those 5 or 6 people? And what's their bias? What's their goal for society? And depending upon their bias, there may be some stories that they lead with, and there may be some stories that they bury. There's certainly a lot of stories in the media today. We're hearing a lot about Black Lives Matter. But there are some people saying, why aren't we hearing more about the thousands of children that have been abducted? How come we don't have a count every day of not new COVID cases, but new children that have gone missing in America? You know, is that not an issue worthy of our scrutiny? Should we not be worried about how many children have gone missing? Why aren't we looking at that more? Yes?
I also wonder why they don't talk about the sex rings.
Yeah, exactly. connected to the missing children would be those sex rings, those islands like, what's his buddy had?
Jeffrey Epstein.
Epstein, there you go. So Epstein has this island, a lot of famous people go to it. You'd think we'd be talking about that. Hillary Clinton, hundreds of thousands of emails that contained, sexual content. Much of it inappropriate content directed towards people that were minors. You think we'd be talking about that? We have masks on. Why aren't we looking at other things? Why is our attention on one thing? So I'm not saying that COVID's a conspiracy because A, I'm recording this, and B, I have a mask on, so obviously I don't believe that. But at the same time, we should be asking ourselves, not only what am I seeing from this story, but why am I seeing this story? What is the story that I'm not getting right now? What story is not being told, and why isn't it being told? So in Adolf Hitler's Germany, the state controlled the media. So in Adolf Hitler's Germany, the state could use the media as a loudspeaker to promote Hitler's vision for society. Well, in Canada, the CBC is state-run, but let's go to a country like the United States, where the majority of the media isn't state-controlled, but it is controlled by 5 or 6 transnational corporations. There's still the same kind of fear that the media becomes a weapon like it did in Hitler's Germany. Another problem might be that you can't compete with these transnationals, much like Montgomery's General Store couldn't compete with Walmart. With Tasco Times, the advertiser can't compete with the New York Times. So another consequence of transnational media is that local media often ends up becoming no longer viable because they aren't cost affordable. So then they become quite limited if they continue to exist, what kind of stories they can run. Living in Canada, we can see this, that I can't think of too many great Canadian films. I really can't think of more than, I don't even know if I can come up with one. I'm kind of shocked with myself right now, a little shocked in a negative way, that, I watch so much American cultural content that I'm not sure what a great Canadian film would be. I know some people like Schitt's Creek, and that might be a great Canadian TV show. Okay, that's a TV show. But great Canadian film. Or even great Canadian musicians. And I know that there's some Canadian musicians. But how much thought do I put into who I'm listening to or what I'm watching, and the externality of that, the consequences? That with globalization, when I watch American film, I'm becoming Americanized. When I'm listening to American music, I become Americanized. That it might be acculturation, where I adopt some of their values, or it might be homogenization, where I end up becoming quite American. Just as an aside, what is a great Canadian film? Yeah?
I know the Titanic was shot in Canada, I just don't know if it was.
Even if it's shot in Canada, that's great that it was, but James Cameron's American, he wrote it. Definitely not Canadian film. Good try though. Lots of good films shot in Vancouver, some in Toronto. There's the odd horrible movie filmed here in Alberta. But starring Canadian actors, written by Canadians, filmed by a Canadian company, I can't think of any. This is embarrassing. I should have thought of this. And this isn't me trying to act it out dramatically, because I don't put that much thought into stuff. A great Canadian film. Anything? Okay, so homework tonight. Not that this is the last 30 seconds of class, but homework tonight. Not that I want you to Google anything, but just ask, people, not random people on the street, because this could become dangerous for you, especially with the mask on. It's like run up to somebody with a mask on. Hey, do you know a great Canadian film? But ask people in your cohort, in your bubble, ask them about great Canadian films and see if tomorrow somebody can come up with one. I'm a blank. Like I'm even like trying to reverse engineer and say, okay, this is a Canadian actor or actress. What have they been in? It's just like silence in my brain. Yep.
I might be wrong, but I think Iron Will is Canadian.
Iron Will?
Yeah, that's what the dogs and Kevin Spacey.
Yeah, you have me at the dogs. It sounds Canadian. Kevin Spacey, this is after American Beauty, so the world had already found out he's a creepy guy, so he might have had to go to Canada to make movies. You might be right.
In the 90s, I think.
Is it a good movie?
I like it.
Is it about the Iditarod in the north?
I don't know. It's dog sledding.
Yeah.
I watched it in my agriculture class for some reason in middle school.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it was okay.
Might have to watch that. So one of the fears with globalization is that we could lose our culture, and we can look at the power of American cinema, the power of Hollywood, and its transforming nature. Another aspect here is cultural hybridization. That ginger beef was invented in Calgary is an amazing thing in my mind. That ginger beef, you go to China. We went to China in 2008, and our students thought, hey, let's have some Chinese food. Let's have ginger beef. It's like, well, that's invented in North America. It's like, really? Yeah, a place called Calgary, and we're like, we're from Alberta. That's super close to us. That's 2 hours away, and we thought it was a Chinese thing. Or we expect to get, Chinese fortune cookies, and those are invented in San Francisco. So cultural hybridization is, as a result of globalization, sometimes cultures fuse with each other. And it can be a good thing. Korean barbecue tacos. So Koreans traditionally didn't have tacos, but you take tacos from, Latin American countries, like Mexico, you add in Korean barbecue, and maybe more homework for this week, have some Korean barbecue tacos and tell me that that's not fantastic. So cultural hybridization is this fusion of culture. And culture doesn't just have to be food, it can be performance, it can be music, it can be dance, and sometimes it can be amazing things. Sesame Street broadcast in China showing traditional Chinese culture. So instead of Sesame Street broadcasting in China and still pretending to be filmed in New York City, it's Sesame Street, but it's Chinese Sesame Street. So it's a fusion of cultures. So cultural hybridization is another possible consequence of globalization. That you might have things come together and create something new. The existence of cultural hybridization could be a reason to reflect globalization. It's like, hey man, globalization is great because we now have Korean barbecue tacos. We have, Irish river dance connected to, some kind of Philadelphia rap music. That could be amazing. So who's going to do that for homework? You have to write some rap and perform a river dance to it. I'm sure you can river dance and rap at the same time. Anybody think of any cultural hybridization that they're familiar with? Yes?
Hawaiian pizza.
Hawaiian pizza. And putting pineapple on pizza is a Canadian invention. So go Canada. We made pizza gross. But yeah, Hawaiian pizza, yep.
I don't know if this counts, but I know that Greek Dora teaches English.
Greek
Instead
Dora.
of Spanish.
Like instead of Dora being like the Spanish girl that's like, and I can't even think of any Spanish words.
Hola.
Hola! Yeah. Then she goes and says
Yeah,
some
she teaches
Greek
kids English.
Greek kids English. I like that.
Would that be an example?
That would be something. That's absolutely, yeah.
What we would consider Greek food, like that area,
Yeah.
Greek, is actually mostly Turkish food.
Okay.
And it has originated from Turkey, but we know it as Greek food.
Absolutely. So this hybridization may not even be that relatively new. That because of their proximity, the Greeks and the Turks have been contaminating each other's culture at a cuisine level for thousands of years, to the point that they both claim yogurt to be theirs. It's like, well, wait a minute, it came from one of you, not both of you. Who came up with yogurt first? We talked this morning about assimilation. There's just some wrap-up notes on what that is. I mentioned that the Francophones of Quebec are obviously anti-assimilation to the point that they have created French language laws with Bill 101. So if I moved to Montreal and I wanted to create McBride's Pub, it's a great name for a pub, McBride's Pub, then it's a nice British pub, or in this case it would be an Irish pub, obviously. And you come inside and you want to see that authentic Irish pub experience, but because of Bill 101, because of French language laws, you have to have your server approach the customers in French first, even though they're in an Irish pub. The signs have to be in French, even though it's in an Irish pub. And that even includes the outside signage of my business. So I'd have to change the name so that it's less possibly contaminating of their culture. So Quebec is a province in Canada that sees itself surrounded by Anglophones. And in order to protect them from that externality of globalization, which is assimilation, they don't want to be assimilated, they have created what some people call undemocratic laws. They say these laws are not fair. That the government can force you to communicate to your customers in French. Because they believe if they don't do that, their language could die. Who is Francophone in here? Anyone? So when I try to pronounce French, I know who to look to and kind of wince a little bit. Anybody a Francophone? No hands are going up. So what this means is I'm going to pretend I'm the Francophone. I'm going to just like, bourgeoisie, I'll be like, bon, something. What's that word? You guys don't know, you're not Francophone. Will, doesn't your dad speak a little French?
Both my parents, yeah.
Yeah. I remember, no. I just remember that. I'll leave it at that. I am recording this. Marginalization. No, I can't, like there's the word bonsoir. It means hello and goodbye, and I remember your dad said that once, and I'm like, but you used it in this context before, and I was just so confused. I'm a simple person. So marginalization, again, the margins of society are those people that you don't typically see. Marginalization is not a foreign concept to students, to people in Alberta. Albertans feel marginalized. We see that the federal government of Ottawa is thousands of kilometers away, and they don't listen to us. High school students feel marginalized because you are not adults. You cannot vote. So the government doesn't listen to you to the same extent. Or you may feel marginalized because people in your family look at you and say, well, you probably wouldn't know the answer because you're relatively young compared to them. So marginalization is this idea of taking power away, right? And globalization can certainly marginalize people. Globalization has marginalized Canada. If that's my argument, what's my evidence? What would be a case study that would prove that globalization has made Canada worth less than it could have been? Yes?
With First Nations,
Okay.
their rights were pushed aside.
So because of globalization at a historic level, Europeans moved to Canada and they ended up marginalizing the people that were traditional to this territory. They marginalized them by assimilating. They marginalized them by trying to create homogenization, right? So you have those other terms up there like accommodation, integration, homogenization. Now, one of the problems with cultural plurality, when you, instead of homogenizing or assimilating, you allow multiple cultures to coexist, is it will create disunity but it may also potentially be dangerous to the extent that there are certain cultural practices that could be against the common good. That if you allow certain cultural practices to exist, it may become a danger to society. So Canada is kind of in a difficult spot, and we studied this last year in grade 9 with the Charter of Rights, is that we do give individual and collective rights, but the government does reserve the ability to restrict them, reasonably restrict them if needed. And this goes with the idea with cultural accommodation. Can we accommodate everything? Or are there some cultural activities that Canada should say, no, you know what, we can't allow that to happen here? On the positive side of globalization, we can see cultural revitalization. This idea that people can use globalization to revitalize their culture. So maybe you're living in isolation as a Polish Canadian, and you don't really know a lot about Polish history. Through technology, you can connect with other Polish Canadians, and you can learn about your common heritage. So globalization can also provide tools to revitalize your culture. This is the complexity of social studies. The same thing that can be a bad thing can be a good thing. Globalization can assimilate, but it can also revitalize culture. Assimilate is taking culture away. Revitalize is to bring it back. Globalization provides opportunities for both. In Canada, we've also seen cultural accommodation. The textbook does a great example talking about it through the RCP, as they allow Sikhs to wear turbans instead of the traditional Stetson cowboy hat. Can you think of any other accommodations that happen in Canada? That because of globalization, not all Canadians might have the same values, traditions, culture, and the Canadian government are like, you know what, we can accommodate that. We can make room for that. To accommodate is to make room for it. Yep.
In schools with dress codes, people can still wear hijabs.
Absolutely. There you go. So in certain schools with dress codes, like WCHS, there can be exceptions to headwear if the headwear or if the clothing is cultural. All right, so those were some notes that I wanted to share with you from this lesson. Any questions about the notes? Next up, I'm going to get you to do some textbook stuff. And then I'll stop recording.